Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Dear friends, welcome back to our weekly readings of the sayings of the Desert Fathers. Let us sing a prayer and we will proceed. O heavenly King, comfort us, Spirit of truth, who art everywhere present and fillest all things, treasury of good things and giver of life, come and dwell in us, and cleanse us of all impurity, and save our souls, O good one. My apologies for the slightly less than steady hand. Today, I believe we continue reading the sayings of Saint Pimen the Great. I find them to be of a tremendous instruction and consolation, and let's see. I think we start today with the chapter 45. A brother said to Abba Pimen, "If I see something, do you want me to tell you about it?" The elder said to him, "It is written, if one gives answer before he hears, it is his folly and shame. If you are questioned, speak. If not, remain silent." That is something that, unfortunately, we are not always taught on a regular basis. However, I think which would definitely be beneficial if we were taught these things. Perhaps maybe not just as children in school, when we are not fully aware of everything that is said to us, but the notion of not speaking unless you are asked is very important. And most likely, my dear friends, if you read the Holy Fathers, you read their works, you will be amazed and edified when you read such great men as St. John of the Ladder, who basically states that the only reason he wrote the book, The Ladder of Divine Ascent, is because he was prompted to do so. And he was prompted persistently and very strongly. He himself did not think himself to be worthy or ready to write books of instructions, but he did it for the sake of obedience. And I think sometimes that is definitely a simple rule that can bring so much peace and quiet, even into our family lives, not just into the monastic communities, because obviously, this is pertaining to monks, but even for us Christians, it could be of tremendous importance just in our parish life and even in the family life. Speak when you are asked. Unless you are asked, do not speak, unless there's something very, very important and necessary that you need to say. Other than that, sometimes if you hold your peace and you don't allow your thoughts to cross your lips too easily and too rapidly, you would actually bring tremendous benefit to your friends and to your relatives. Chapter 46. A brother asked Abba Pimen, saying, "Can a man put his trust in one single work?" The elder said to him that Abba John the Dwarf said, "I would rather have a bit of all the virtues." So St. John the Dwarf tried to do different work, not just focus on one thing, and he tried to do a little bit of all the virtues. Although in English language, of course, we have a saying, "Jack of all trades and master of none." So perhaps St. John the Dwarf, when he had achieved tremendous virtues in some, he then proceeded to acquire others. It's quite a different thing when a person rushes from one virtue to another without getting any accomplishment, without establishing any foundation in any given virtue. then of course things become a heaping mess. So in that sense, definitely, let us not be beguiled by this advice. It is truly good to have a little bit of all the virtues, but that's just it. To have a little bit. In other words, actually to have a footing in the virtue, to have some experience in it, to have some practice in it, not just an attempt at it. You see, that's quite different. This is something that we often fall prey to. We attempt. We attempt a little bit of this, we attempt a little bit of that, we attempt a little bit of another thing. We don't really truly accomplish anything. There's a great difference. Think of it this way. If a hostess or a host knew that he had guests coming or she had guests coming, that the visitors were coming to the house, and the person started cooking various dishes, but never finished any single one, then when the guests would arrive, there would be nothing whatsoever at all to treat them with, because everything would be sort of, there would be some dough mixed up, there may be some meat seasoned, but not cooked, not baked, not finished. What St. Pimen here is saying, and referring to St. John the Dwarf, saying, I would rather have a little bit of all the virtues, so to actually have something cooked. So maybe you don't bake a very big cake, but maybe you make a couple of pancakes for dessert, or some French toast. Maybe you don't have a steak or a roast, but you have some other meat or sausage cooked, or at least maybe from a previous meal, something warmed up, so that you actually have something to show for your efforts and for yourself. So that is a tremendous difference here, is not just to run around attempting to acquire the various virtues, actually to acquire some, at least a few. And then, of course, that's a tremendous difference. Chapter 47. The elder said that a brother asked Abba Pambo if it is good to praise one's neighbor, and that the elder said to him, it is better to be silent. Well, indeed, sometimes when we praise someone, we might have a good idea in mind, but there are various implications as to why it is actually better not to say anything. Now, if something is being done to us, if the neighbor has helped us, then maybe rather than praising the neighbor, we should thank the neighbor. So in that sense, we should give that which is due, the laborer is worthy of his hire. If it isn't monetary compensation, if it isn't a fair payment for the service, then at least a show of gratitude for certain. But praise and gratitude are different things, and often praise is used by people, whether intentionally or unintentionally, sometimes not to the best of ends, because when we are being praised, chances are somebody is buttering us up for something, so in that sense, yes, if you see your neighbor succeeding in doing something good, probably, what is it they call, imitation is the best form of flattery. So if your neighbor, if your fellow parishioner, if your fellow family member is doing well in spiritual life, rather than praising, just emulate, follow a good example, and that's the best kind of praise, without actually having to say words. Because when you start speaking words, well, there could be some major temptations associated with that. Chapter 48. Abba Pimen said, if a man were to make a new heaven and earth, he could not live free of care. Indeed, if we were to make new heaven and earth in our image and likeness, or at least sort of according to our design, there will be all sorts of cares associated with that. And of course, we realize that the multiple possessions add multiple cares, and so on and so forth. Chapter 49. He also said, as the breath which comes out of his nostrils, so does a man need humility and the fear of God. Well, there's probably nothing really to comment in this one, because humility and the fear of God indeed are the foundation of all good works and all virtues. Chapter 50. A brother asked Abba Pimin, "What should I do?" The elder said to him, "When Abraham entered the promised land, he bought a sepulchre for himself, and by means of this tomb he inherited the land." The brother said to him, "What is the tomb?" The elder said, "The place of tears and compunction." So, I imagine maybe what St. Pimen was telling this particular brother is that this particular brother needed a place, whether that be his own cell or a customary place in church or something. But he needed a place of tears and compunction, some place where he could freely weep over his sins. As a parish priest, I have observed people who come to church and on occasion they weep over their sins. Sometimes they weep during confession. Sometimes they weep when they lose a loved one or something happens in their lives. But on average, all of us find it difficult to weep in front of other people, because when you come into the church for service and the church is full of people, it's not easy to just stand before an icon and weep, because thoughts, what will people think or what will they say, do bother us. And in that sense, St. Pimen's advice is very valuable, because he's telling this brother, you need a place of tears and compunction. That is why monks had their cells where they spent plenty of time in solitude, where they could weep without being hindered by being observed by others. Chapter 51. A brother said to Abba Pimen, "If I give my brother a little bread or something else, the demons tarnish these gifts, saying, 'It was only done to please men.'" The elder said to him, "Even if it is to please men, we must give the brother what he needs." He told him the following parable. Two farmers lived in the same town. One of them sowed and reaped a small and poor crop, while the other, who did not even trouble to sow, reaped absolutely nothing. If a famine comes upon them, which of the two will find something to live on? The brother replied, "The one who reaped the small poor crop." The elder said to him, "So it is with us. We sow a little poor grain, so that we will not die of hunger." And this, I think, is a temptation that is well known to many, many, many people. As soon as we embark upon the path of salvation, as soon as we start our spiritual journey and we make an attempt to practice virtue, whether it is to pray or to give alms or to do anything, instantly the enemy is there, and we are distracted in prayer. So in that sense, you might say our prayer is not pure before God, because it's full of our own earthly cares and various thoughts, sometimes even bad thoughts, and I don't mean just the temptation of bad thoughts, because there's no sin in being approached by evil thoughts. The sin is entertaining them. And sometimes during prayer we do get entangled in thoughts which are inappropriate, maybe of judging others or various other sundry things. When we do a good work, we feel proud. So all of our virtues that we offer to God, sort of as the fruit of our repentance, all of our virtues are tainted, I guess I would say. Like a crop, you might say that, we have a poor crop. There are plenty of thistles and various things and, sort of bad seeds that need to be picked away. However, what St. Pimen is saying to the brother here is that if you look at your attempt, if you look at your ascetic struggle, your intention to do good, or your actual practice of good, and you say to yourself, well, whatever I'm doing is not good enough because of thus and so, because I'm tempted or something else. If you stop, that means you will have absolutely nothing to give to God. So in that sense, imagine if you had friends coming over, what is better? To have some humble meal to share. Even if it's just, a few pieces of bread, some tea, maybe some jam or something. Something very humble, not very fancy, but still something to eat. Or to have nothing, absolutely nothing. Well, it's always better to have a little bit of something, however humble, than nothing. So in that sense, what Abba Piman is saying to this brother and to us as well, we must never give up practicing virtue because the enemy, sort of thinking that we should stop because we're not doing a good enough job. You will never get good enough unless you try. And if you stop, one thing is for certain, you will never get anywhere. So in that sense, absolutely. Even if our virtue is tainted or spoiled, by a little bit of pride or condemnation of others, if we do something good and then we're tempted to compare ourselves to others, it's okay. It's better to fight the temptation to become proud, fight the temptation to compare ourselves to others, or maybe to begrudge others because we're doing and they're not. Whatever it is better to do whatever good that we're capable of doing, even if it's not perfect, than to do nothing at all. That is for certain. Think of it this way. If we meet an injured person on the way, whether we're driving or walking, if we just walk away by saying, well, whatever help I offer this person isn't really going to be the same as a medical, an experienced medic, a doctor or a nurse, well, if you just walk away, well, the person will either die or will, sort of continue to get worse. But if you stop and you offer the best help that you can until maybe the medics arrive, you can help. Now, granted, in this medical allegory, there are times when we can harm someone if we do whatever it is, the wrong thing. So in the spiritual struggle, indeed, sometimes attempting to do virtue, you can end up doing something that is bad. And I can give you an example of King Saul, who, after he was told not to spare anyone of the enemies, in fact, took the king captive and told the prophet Samuel that, well, I brought you the king. Isn't that a good thing? I decided to bring you the king. And prophet Samuel, of course, said, well, no, the Lord told you to put everyone to the sword, not to spare anyone, not to save, not to bring anyone. So there are times when we can do wrong things. But if we're in fact aware of what we're doing being right, at least sort of in the general direction, if it's your morning or evening prayers, if you are saying them, well, it is better to say them and to be distracted or to have to stop and start again. Or it is better to say pray in your car on your way to work than not to pray at all. That's probably what we should take away from this particular chapter. Chapter 52. Abba Piman said that Abba Amonas said, a man can spend his whole life carrying an axe without succeeding in cutting down the tree, while another, with experience of tree felling, brings the tree down with a few blows. He said that the axe is discernment. Well, that's very interesting. So, he says, one can spend his whole life carrying an axe without succeeding in cutting down the tree, while another, with experience of tree felling, brings the tree down with a few blows. He said that the axe is discernment. So in this particular case, if I guess what he's basically saying is that just having a virtue isn't enough. You also need to realize to what end you are using the virtue, for what purpose. are you using this virtue? So if you have discernment, you should use it for the benefit of yourself and of your neighbor. Having discernment just for the sake of discernment is, inconsequential. It's really no good. So in that sense, yes, you have a sharp axe, but you don't even know how to bring down a tree, because you're if you have an excellent axe and you're just chopping down branches, the tree is not going to fall. So, and you could make very nice cuts and so on and so forth. In other words, you could say some very pretty or nice make some nice sounding statements, but if they don't affect the necessary changes, then what are you saying? You may be skilled in the art of speech, and you may give a very nice speech, but if that speech does not accomplish the necessary task of motivating the person to do the right thing, or maybe comforting the person during the difficult time, well, then indeed, to what end are you possessing this virtue? So that is very, very, how should I say, sobering. It's a very sobering thought, that not only should you have discernment, but you should use discernment to a good end, to a good purpose. Chapter 53. A brother asked Abba Piman, "How should a man behave?" The elder said to him, "Look at Daniel. No one found anything in him to complain about except for his prayers to the Lord God." Wow, that's a very tall order. If the only thing that people could complain about us is our prayers to God, then indeed we are pure and wonderful. But unfortunately, I'm sure that people probably looking at us would find quite a few legitimate things to complain about, things that we could shape up about or do better. But Abba Piman gave the example of the prophet Daniel in his perfection, that he was so holy and so pious that there was nothing people could pick at except the fact that he was praying to the Lord. Chapter 54. Abba Piman said, "The will of man is a brass wall between him and God, and the stone of stumbling. When a man renounces it, he is also saying to himself, 'By my God, I can leap over the wall.' If a man's will is in line with what is right, then he can really labor." Now, this is a very significant saying, a saying that's very important, and it's very nice that Abba Piman, in a way, does some explanation of what he's saying already by saying, when a man renounces it, meaning his own will, he is also saying to himself, "By my God, I can leap over a wall, over the wall, or the wall." So our will is the wall between us and God. And for sure, think about it this way. When we say the prayer, "Our Father," we don't stop to think about the fact that, "Our Father who art in the heavens, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done." See how early in the prayer, really like the fourth main thought, "Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." We are earth. Adam means taken from earth. So on earth, "Thy will be done in us as it is in heaven," as with your angels in heaven. Think of it this way. If the Lord instructs us to pray that, how does this tie with what St. Piman says? Professor Osipov at the Moscow Spiritual Academy repeats this particular thought time after time after time in his lectures. He says, God does not save us without us. Maybe I could do a better translation by saying, God does not save us without our participation. So, in other words, God does not save us without us, meaning we must remove this brass wall of our sinful, stiff-necked will in order for God to save us. because God does not save anyone against his will. And so you might say that our salvation is not easily accomplished. In fact, it's already accomplished. With a caveat, right? God has done everything to effect our salvation. The Son of God was incarnate of the Virgin Mary. He became man. He was born for our salvation. He was baptized in the Jordan, especially as we commemorate today. He ascended the cross. He died on the cross. He was buried. He rose from the dead. He ascended into the heavens, and he sitteth at the right hand of God the Father. So he has done everything to reunite the human nature with the Father. In his person, he has united the two natures, the divine and the human. And he has made it possible once again for the sons of Adam to be united with God. Provided we comply, provided we offer our own will. Think about what happened on the Feast of the Annunciation to the Mother of God by the Archangel Gabriel of the coming of the Messiah into this world. What was the Virgin Mary's response? She says, "Behold the handmaiden of the Lord, be it unto me according to thy word." So there's full submission. There's a full setting aside of her own will. She doesn't say, "But I want, but I wish, but I, whatever." She says, "Behold the handmaiden of the Lord." So I am fully at God's disposal. And unless we are willing to say that, well, there's a wall between us and God. And not only between us and God, but also our own will puts a wall between us and our neighbor. And the more self-willed, the more willful, the more sinfully inclined we are, the thicker, the harder, the less penetrable is this wall. And so, not just for a monastic, for any man to renounce his own will is essentially to say, by my God, I can leap over the wall. This wall of enmity. God has done everything to remove the wall. Now it's up to us. We must remove it from ourselves. We must remove it from our hearts. We must sort of break our hardened stone hearts and sort of receive from God the hearts of flesh again, the hearts that can feel, the hearts that can sympathize and empathize with our fellow neighbor, the hearts that can truly love God and be grateful to him for what he's done for us. Because without our willing cooperation, nothing can be done. If we are, and in fact, this is something sort of to do as a homework. If there's something in your life about which you're praying and you're not seeing a result, take a step back, take a look at the situation, examine yourself, and see, are you indeed willing to do what it is that you're asking for God? Are you indeed willing to accept this change that you're asking from God? Because if you're not willing, God is there and he's ready to give it to you. But if you are not willing to do it, if you're not prepared, well then why? Why should he? God does not save us by force. We are the ones that take the kingdom of heaven by force. We are the ones that need to show to God our disposition of will. Sometimes God tries us. Think of it this way. When you want to join a certain organization, when you want to join a certain group, sometimes you're expected to go through a harrowing initiation and a very strict and tight examination. You must meet certain criteria and so on and so on and so on. And all of that is not just to make that sort of society that you're entering very exclusive. It's also how many of these societies protect themselves from people joining them sort of on a whim and then leaving. Because imagine if every day somebody joined your organization and then they disappeared. That would be incredibly difficult, right? So, there are requirements. There are certain things that are expected of people to do in order to join something. And for that matter, God is asking us to set aside our will in order to join him. And that is so that we stop, contemplate, and say and confess to ourselves and to God, indeed, I do wish to receive this salvation. I do wish to live a Christian life. Because if we don't wish it, God's not going to sort of put it on us against our will. That's not going to happen. Chapter 55. He also said, as the elders were sitting at a meal one day, Abba Alonius got up to serve, and when they saw that, they praised him. But he answered absolutely nothing. So one of them said to him privately, why don't you answer the elders who are complimenting you? Abba Alonius said to him, if I were to reply to them, I should be accepting their praises. Aha. So he did not want to receive the praise from men. He wanted to be praised by God for what he was doing. And that is why he wasn't replying to them. So he wasn't trying to be rude. But if he were to thank them, that means that he would accept, he would agree with them, he would acquiesce to whatever they were praising him for. But in order not to accept the praise, he had to be silent. And in it we see on one hand humility, and on the other hand an effort to acquire the grace of God, so that he would be praised by God and not by men. He also said, men speak to perfection, but they do precious little about it. Ha 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 ha. Isn't that the case even to this day? Not only about among the monastics, but also among the Christians. Everybody wants to see an elder. Everybody wants to see a saint. Everyone wants to see a miracle. No one wants to take the responsibility. That is a tremendous difference. Everybody talks about how orthodoxy is beautiful, how it is the true faith, how it is the only true Christianity, which is all fair and absolutely true. And we should be willing not only to say it, we should be willing to die for that. There are saints who died confessing orthodoxy as the true faith, not just Christianity, but specifically the Orthodox Christianity. There were martyrs who were put to death and tormented and tortured for that. We all like to talk about it. We like to sing the praises of God, the praises of the saints. But when it comes to living a Christian life, oh, well, I should be silent now lest I should sin by judging others. I should first and foremost judge myself. Chapter 57. Abba Pimen said, just as smoke drives the bees away and also takes the sweetness out of their work, so bodily ease drives the fear of God from the soul and dissipates all its activity. So I imagine that even from sort of a sports-oriented opinion in this case, it makes sense. For an athlete to be in good shape, he shouldn't relax too much. If he is expected to perform well, think of it, the soldiers who are not even on active duty, yet they go through various drills and they keep themselves in shape, because if called upon, well, sort of being out of shape is not a good thing. So in that sense, bodily ease drives the fear of God from the soul and dissipates all its activity. The reason here they're talking about bodily ease, because you could almost say to yourself, well, what does bodily ease have to do with spiritual contemplation? It's not like the saints were, working out or anything like that. They weren't necessarily athletic. Well, they kept vigil, so they were spending a lot of time of night in prayer without sort of proper rest. They fasted. They also did handiwork, so they would weave ropes or baskets or various things to sort of earn enough money to provide for their needs, so as not to rely on others for their livelihood. And in that sense, I imagine that even rising for prayer or sort of doing the good works, if you're not in the right tone, if physically you are not in good shape, it makes it difficult to get up and go. I could probably relate to that. I should be in better shape for sure, and that there is something about sloth. The more you give into it, the more it conquers you. It's counterintuitive. You think, if only I could rest a little, I'd feel better. But in a way, there's a point beyond which the more you rest, the worse you feel. So in that sense, being active, and especially it doesn't have to be necessarily physically active in terms of sort of maintaining a certain physical appearance or something like that, but being active even mentally, being active spiritually is very important for sure. Let's see, chapter 58. A brother came to see Abba Piman in the second week of Lent and told him about his thoughts. He obtained peace and said to him, I nearly did not come here today. The elder asked him why. The brother said, I said to myself, perhaps he will not let me in because it is Lent. Abba Piman said to him, we have not been taught to close the wooden door, but the door of our tongues. Now, let us stop there today. It is a feast day, so we will sort of pick up and continue hopefully next week. Today we will stop a little bit shorter. But on this particular last thing, how beautiful it is that the brother was wondering whether even to go because it's Lent and that he might not be received by St. Piman, but St. Piman said that we were taught to shut the door of our tongue, not the wooden door. So in that sense, yes, it's Lent, it's time for contemplation and sort of augmented prayer. But if the brother came for proper spiritual counsel and received it, then it doesn't take away from the elder's fast. It doesn't take away from his Lent to console someone and to direct someone in the right path. So much so that I recall the Gospel of St. John and the very time when the Lord was speaking to the Samaritan woman. If you recall, when the disciples came, they were very surprised, and they offered the Lord, and they told him, eat, you must eat something. And remember, the Lord said, I have food that you know not of. And they were, of course, they were wondering, like, who came here, who gave him food. But then the Lord replied and said, my food is to do the will of the Father who sent me. And so in that sense, I would definitely relate and say that for a monastic to help a fellow brother persevere in a proper physical struggle, that doesn't take away. If anything, that actually contributes to his Lent, to his fasting. And so in that sense, let us also be encouraged that there is a difference between idle chat, when we're just chit-chatting, and the time when we're talking and we're consoling or edifying one another. There is a difference. Sometimes we think that, well, during Lent we shouldn't talk at all with anyone. That's not necessarily the case. Or, if it's not Lent, if it's a fasting day or whatever, or it's a feast day, and we think, oh, well, I need to leave and that's it. If you are walking out of the church and someone approaches you with a legitimate spiritual question for counsel, for your opinion, provided the person is approaching you in earnest, if you give that counsel, you will not lose the grace of the Holy Communion. You will not lose the grace of being in the church and being filled, sort of with the grace of the service. But if you stop and you start talking about other people, judging other people, and so on and so forth, then, of course, instantly grace would dissipate. So in that sense, I think that's what St. Piman was saying in the last chapter that we read today. God willing, we will continue next week. I believe it should be Wednesday without any major trouble. There are services next week on the 25th and the 27th. They're announced in the schedule for the morning times, so the evening times for our prayer service and for the broadcast should be fine. Please keep me in your prayers. I hope all of you had a wonderful feast day of Theophany, of the baptism of the Lord. I hope all of you got the holy water. Everybody sort of worries about that a lot. And especially in the pre-pandemic years, we've always had a tremendous crowd of people at the church with, empty bottles or looking for empty bottles in order to get some holy water to take it home. That's wonderful. That's great. Unfortunately, today, sadly, we did not go to Bless the Lake, Ontario, because with all the various things happening, there was a major snowstorm, which no doubt probably cut off our access to the lake, and also just the fatigue from the recent, days and everything. We're hoping and praying to go to the lake and to bless it next year on this feast. God bless you, and please pray for me. Let us finish with prayer to the Mother of God, and God willing, we will be back next Wednesday. It is truly meet to bless thee, that thou art ever blessed and most blameless, and Mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, and beyond compare more glorious than the seraphim, who without corruption gave his birth to God the Word, the very Theotokos, thee do we magnify. God bless and happy feast day.